So she takes me, says, okay, here's the pan. You put butter in, you beat the eggs, you pour it in. You ready? So that was all the training I got. And so they opened the door and all of a sudden there's 10 people in line.
Welcome to the Restaurant Leaders Unplugged podcast, where real talks with restaurant leaders take center stage. Discover the challenges and victories that define success in the culinary world. Dive into essential strategies from marketing to operations and gain insights that will transform your approach to your restaurant business. Don't just keep up, lead the way. Join me, your host, Sebastian Stahl, on this journey to excellence. All right. David, welcome to the Restaurant Leaders Unplugged podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you here. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I think you're bringing a very interesting point of view into the world of hospitality and how you help and work with many hospitality leaders.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Let's start at the beginning, like we do every show, right? Like we want to hear a little bit about your background, how you got started. I know you're passionate about the restaurant industry and the world of hospitality, but you have a different angle, right?
I do. I was born in 1961, but we're not going to go that far. But my voyage in the hospitality industry really started at the end of high school. I grew up in Philadelphia, great restaurant town, by the way, then and now. And I was the youngest of the family. My sister's 2 years older than me. And she was the artist in the family. I was like the good student. So she went to art school. She started baking when she was relatively young, making cookies and all kinds of stuff. And so when I had graduated high school, it was 1979, she was working in a restaurant in Philadelphia, which at the time was a very sort of cutting edge thing. It was a gourmet cafeteria called the Commissary. It was started by a great restaurateur of that era named Steve Poses. And unlike my kids now, when they were in between high school and college, they had internships, they were working on their resumes. I had no plans for the summer. And she calls me up, wakes me up as we were talking about. I was a good sleeper and says, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm sleeping. And she said, can you come work? Someone called in sick. And I said, sure. So I got dressed, I jumped on the bus, I went uptown, got to the place. They gave me an apron and I was bussing tables and pouring coffee. And it was fun. I'm like talking to the customers and getting into the vibe. And all of a sudden the day flies by and they go, okay, you want a job? You want to come back tomorrow? And I said, sure. I came back the next day and I learned a little bit more and a little bit more. About 3 weeks in, so there was a gourmet cafeteria. You would literally get a tray and you go down the line and you get a cup of soup, you get a tossed salad, you get a piece of carrot cake and a cup of coffee, whatever. In the back, they had an omelet bar where they made omelets to order. And so I come in one day and the manager says, do you know how to make an omelet? And I said, no. She said, do you want to learn? I said, sure. So she takes me, says, okay, here's the pan. You put butter in, you beat the eggs, you pour it in. You ready? So that was all the training I got. And so they opened the door and all of a sudden there's 10 people in line. And when people, particularly when they're regulars, like they want their breakfast, they're a little cranky and they want it the way they want it and they don't want to wait for it. And meanwhile, I'd never done this before. And I was using the old school, not the non-stick pans, but the cast aluminum pans that you have to season. And naturally they were not well seasoned. They'd been left by whoever. They were sticking and I had 3 pans working, trying to get an omelet out of there. Totally baptism by fire. And like, I was in at that point. I learned how to do it. I got through it. And so with that little bit of experience, my first 2 summers of college, my roommate asked me if I wanted to go to Aspen, Colorado for the summer because his folks had a ski condo in Snowmass. And naturally I said yes. And so we went out and first day there, I start walking around downtown Aspen, Colorado, walking the back door of every restaurant saying, hey, do you need someone? I can cook. And this guy's a real character. Aspen was different back then. Now it's billionaires. Back then it was an interesting crowd of people. And this guy's name was Ruby because he had a ruby earring and he was like gruff on the outside, pulls out this diner menu and he says, can you do this? And I said, yeah, I can do that. And he said, you better not be lying because you know what I do to liars? I throw them out the back door. So I showed up the next day. Within 15 minutes, he clearly knows I was full of it. But he took pity on me and liked me. And so I learned how to cook out there. And honestly, it was the best job I've ever had. I'm not sure it would have aged well, but at 19, I worked from 8 to 2. I got paid in cash. Sun went down at 10 o'clock, lots of stuff to do out there. And it was great. But I learned how to cook. I learned timing. I learned how to have a rack full of tickets with all kinds of things and how to coordinate all that. And when you cook in a restaurant, you learn to ride the waves. And it's quite exhilarating if you could stay up and not fall off the board. And so I did that for 2 summers, and then I came back for school, and I had a friend who was working at a fine dining, like one of the top 5 restaurants in Philadelphia in that era, called La Terrasse. It was a French restaurant that the owner had gone to Europe after college and discovered the French sidewalk cafe and said, we should recreate this in Philadelphia. And that's what we did. And by the time I got there, they'd gotten fancier. We were doing like beurre blancs and all kinds of sauces. I look at the menu now and I'm like, I think we all probably should have had heart attacks because it was lots of butter and cream and stuff like that. But it was a great environment. There were a ton of people that had gone to the Culinary Institute, that had trained in France, that just loved food and wine and hospitality. And it was really a center of hospitality in the city. And so I worked there through my last 2 years of college, 2 nights and Sunday brunch. And one thing I noticed, that if you're a junior or senior in college, that Sunday brunch comes very soon after Saturday night. So I learned how to sling eggs Benedict with no sleep and a little hungover, but managed to get through that. And so when I graduated, I had a degree in psychology, decided I was not going to pursue that. I didn't want to be a shrink or work with white rats in a lab, and had no training in finance. Did not take a single business or finance or accounting class or anything like that. And the chef, a guy named Ed Doherty, who I am still friends with and in touch with, great guy, said, why don't you come work full time? And he said, you're pretty good and we like you. And I said, great. So told my parents, who bit their lip and didn't say, what the hell are you doing? We just sent you to 4 years of good school and now you're going to be a chef. But they supported me. And so I was a line cook. I got promoted to lunch chef, which was the best gig yet, because it was Monday through Friday, 8 to 6. I still had a life. I'd go out at night. I could go see my friends on the weekend. And it was great. Learned how to make soup because my job was to come up with soup every day. So I have an extensive repertoire of soup recipes. And then I got promoted to be the sous chef, which meant nights and weekends. And I think in hindsight, that was the beginning of the end for me. I ended up, the general manager at the time, who was a real presence in the restaurant, a woman named Judy Wicks, opened a restaurant in her house down the street called the White Dog Cafe. The White Dog Cafe is still there. She doesn't own it anymore. She sold it a few years ago. But Judy is an incredibly energetic, enthusiastic activist, child of the 60s. And she was just so much fun to be around. And I think it was one of the reasons why I fell in love with the industry, is she really brought that culture and that culture of hospitality. And so I was her opening chef there. That experience almost broke me. It was great. It was a little bit all over the place. I remember prepping in her kitchen at 3:00 in the morning, in a kitchen or a house above the restaurant. So it was a great experience. But then I decided to go back I went to the Culinary in Hyde Park for a 6-week continuing education program to get some cred. And I came back and ready to strike out on my own. And I'd say within 3 weeks, the bloom was off the rose. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I was working at a restaurant in Philadelphia, in Center City, Philadelphia, called Apropos. It was a really cool Brazilian restaurant that was run by 2 of the worst people I've ever met. So that was And it was an open kitchen. And on Saturday night, they had a band. They had live music and people dancing. So I'm there, it's Saturday night. I'm covered in like soot and grease because I'm working on a wood burning grill. And I'm cleaning up and I'm covered in oil and everything. And I turn and I see all these people out there dancing and music. And I'm like, this sucks. You want to be there, not here. And was also a recognition that when I'm 22, it was a great thing to do. It was a lot of fun. There were a lot of people around after work. I was at a bar. But as I saw my friends go out in the world and I thought about what this would look like 10, 20 years down the road, I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure. I love this. I love food. I love creating food. I love being in these spaces, but I'm not sure this is the lifestyle that's going to work for me. So I walked out and I never went back. And so at that point, I really didn't know. I had a degree in psychology. I had experience. Restaurant work in kitchen, working in a kitchen is amazing life experience, but from a credentials point of view, had nothing. And I backdoored my way into finance, managed to get a job by faking it till I made it. One thing led to another. And I ended up I was working for a company in Philadelphia where they worked with a lot of families that owned businesses that were reasonably wealthy and provided a bunch of services to them. but I started a wealth management business for them because a lot of those companies were starting to get sold to private equity firms and really having much more significant liquidity than they had had before. And they didn't really have a good answer to what do I do now, which seemed to be a good question to be able to answer. And so as a young guy in the bullpen in the back in front of my giant PC, I raised my hand and I said, I think maybe we come up with a better answer, build a business plan, launch the business in 1989, and really not knowing what we were doing, made it up as we went along. And that has led to 36 years of being an advisor to wealthy individuals doing wealth management. So I've been doing that since. What happened about 9 years ago is I really got tired of trying to convince people that were older, that were established, had been wealthy for a while, had done a lot of the work that we would typically do, and trying to get them to become clients was challenging because there's only so much we could do. We could always come up with an angle or an idea or an investment strategy that they hadn't heard of before, but that's not a great basis for a relationship. And I have a great friend and a client, a guy named Jeff Colton, who has spent a lot of years in the hospitality business. And I said, Jeff, can I pick your brain? And he said, absolutely. So we went to dinner at Red Farm, which is one of the great Chinese restaurants in New York City that he had done some work for. So it was a tough table to get, but he was able to get it. I told him what I was thinking about a way to connect my food passion and my history in the business with my day job. And I said, is this a crazy idea? Does anyone make money in restaurants enough to need my help? And he said, yeah, I know a lot of people. Let's do a dinner and I'll invite my group and introduce them to you and we'll have a great time. And so we did that on November 8th, 2016. If you look at the calendar, it was the day after the first Trump election. And the day before, we're like, what if he wins? This is going to be a disaster. Not just talking about the world, but just for our dinner. And so the next day, everyone came in and we're like, okay, the bar's over there. It's going to be okay. And we had a great dinner and people really appreciated the opportunity to just get together without an agenda and just have a great meal. And that kind of kicked it off. And so from there, I've just developed, really become embedded in the food and beverage community in New York and beyond, but very New York centric. So I've got to know a lot of the hospitality folks. So the operators, the investors, the service providers, the lawyers, the bookkeepers, I'll do a lot in the consumer packaged goods space. Similarly, hospitality tech is definitely part of that world. And I just try to be a friend and a facilitator to founders and entrepreneurs in those areas. And I can speak to them both as a practitioner of finance and wealth management that can be relevant to some of them at some point in time, but a lot of them, when I meet them, aren't even at that point. And so I just try to be helpful to them in ways to get where they're trying to get to with their business. And I love entrepreneurs. I love food. Everyone who I meet in food, and maybe this is not true at a certain level of sort of giant food companies, everyone's got a story. They have a reason why they went into the business. And it's clearly not the easiest path. It's not the most profitable path, but people do it because they have a passion. And ultimately in the restaurant world, they want to make people happy. People come in, they have a great meal. It's a great experience. You don't do that if you really don't have that gene that says, I want to make people happy, give them a great experience, something that they'll remember hopefully for a long time.
You have a very unique background, David, and I think that's what it allows you to establish those connections. You have the hospitality gene in you. So you're able to build those connections, and that's what it's about.
Yeah. I think I've figured out a way to hack the system in that I can pretend I'm in the hospitality business, but I get my weekends off and a lot of my nights free. So I feel very fortunate in that. And one of the things that I do, I find that people in the industry, everyone's got their heads down and they don't have the opportunity to reconnect with peers and other people in the industry and to meet new people that could be relevant potential collaborators. And since we started that dinner in 2016, I've done a lot of events, some bigger in the last couple of years post-COVID, out of a Zoom call we did during the pandemic that we called Hospitality Squares that we did 26 times, just to get people together to talk about how do you navigate this, PPP loans, renegotiating your lease, pivoting to takeout and delivery and all that kind of stuff. And then we made it a recurring sit-down dinner somewhere great in the city and with a great group of people who would enjoy connecting. And we just get such great responses. And we've actually had a a deal, a transaction come out of, it was actually the Zoom call where a couple of people met on the call and they collaborated on investing in a fast casual chain that was started by Michael Solomonov, who's a great Israeli chef based in Philadelphia, Federal Donuts and Chicken. So those guys became investors with him and are trying to take it national in the way. So great thing happened. But I get to pretend I'm in the hospitality business because I get to find the venue, curate the guest list, and it really brings me a lot of joy.
That's great, David. David, what's your unique experience? Like, what do you see as the common financial challenges that food and beverage operators face today?
Too much cost and not enough revenue. It really, that's interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, a lot of, and again, there's different parts of the business. You have the sole operator just has one 30-seat restaurant up to Kava and public companies. And so there's differences between those. But I think the challenge is finding out how to marry that passion for creativity and to create something unique and special with an economic model that's viable. And obviously a lot of what I do is in New York City, and New York City has its challenges of real estate costs are high and getting higher. Labor costs are high and food costs, inputs, eggs are expensive, and really trying to find a business that has a sustainable margin and is scalable, if that's the path you want to go, is such a challenge. And obviously the failure rate's high because of that. And I think I've seen a lot of folks go from fine dining to really narrowing the focus. And instead of saying, I'm a chef, I want to do amazing food, let's take one thing that I do and let's make that a business. The fast casual brand Naya Express, it's a Middle Eastern primarily lunch place where you go down the line like you would in Chipotle and you build the bowl as you go along. Wildly popular. And the founder is a great guy named Hadi Kafori, who is from Beirut. So he knows the food super well. And with a fine dining restaurant. And so came to realize that was a really tough business. And so we started the Naya Express. It did really well. And now they have over 30 and they're expanding up and down the East Coast. So I think there's a lot of that. So it's interesting too, in that I look at New York and say, hey, there's all these challenges, a lot of frictional costs, just like the city and regulation and the SLA. And one of the things that I've noticed over the last 10 years is that places outside of New York, outside of San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, have great food cultures. And if you go look at the Beard Award nominations that just came out, there's places in towns that you would not think of as being culinary hotbeds that really have become that way. And so I think post-COVID, there's a big migration outside of the big cities. I think social media helped because people, wherever they sit, they could be in Cincinnati, but they see food and restaurants in other parts of the country, and that kind of translates. And I always think to someone who wants to start a restaurant in New York, it's like, why do it here? It's so hard. There's so much competition.
I agree.
Charleston's a great town. Obviously, Austin. Interestingly, I had lunch a couple weeks ago with a friend who had come from a successful restaurant in Denver, where she's from, came to New York pre-pandemic, opened a restaurant called the Banty Rooster. It was a great restaurant, opened like December of 19, shut down in March of 20. And then she basically closed it because she couldn't work out a deal with her landlord and didn't want to just burn cash. And so moved back to Denver, opened a new restaurant out there that's been successful. And she confided in me that she wanted to sell her interest in the restaurant, come back to New York and not open a restaurant, but be in the hospitality business in some. She's still got to figure that out. And I said, that's interesting. Why is it so hard out there? And she said, I don't remember what the number is, but they increased the tipped minimum wage 5x from what it was. And she said, it just crushed my profitability. And it was something that the city passed. And she said, but you don't have the kind of demand in Denver that you have in New York, which I thought was really interesting because I'd been to Denver. I've been to her restaurant. I've been to other great restaurants out there. I'm like, this is a cool scene. And seems like there's a lot going on. And I think every market has its own particular challenges, whether it's not enough demand, too much competition, labor being an issue. And obviously I'm sympathetic to people who work in the restaurant business. Obviously want them to get paid an appropriate wage, but the margins aren't thick enough to sustain all that. And I've been doing work. I have a place in the Berkshires in Massachusetts and have gotten involved in the hospitality community up there. And it's a completely different set of challenges. Rent's it's not particularly expensive, very challenging to get qualified labor. And in part because there's not good employee housing, so people don't have a place to live. And there's such a deep pool of talent in New York City where you want to open a restaurant. I just had lunch at Jelena. I don't know if it's Jelena, but very well-known restaurant that has multiple locations in LA, much loved out there, big restaurant in Las Vegas. They opened about a year and a half ago in New York. Week after they opened, it burnt down. And so they rebuilt, reopened, and had lunch there on Monday. And it was fabulous. And my wife and I went, it was our anniversary. So that was our little treat on Monday.
Yep.
And we sat at a counter facing the kitchen, between the glass wall between us. And I'm looking at these guys, and it was all guys in that case. And there's probably like 10 people back there, and they all young, but all looked experienced. Like, we have this incredible depth of talent in New York City that you want to open a restaurant, you can staff a kitchen with good quality trained people. It's hard when you're in a place like the Berkshires. There's just not that deep of talents. I think it's all challenging. I think it always will be challenging. There's no simple answer. It's part of the business that margins are thin. And I do think one of the challenges in the hospitality space is there aren't barriers to entry. Anybody can open a restaurant if they want. And if they don't know what they're doing, they may sign the wrong lease. They may pick the wrong space. The math has to work. You have to be able to say, how many people are going to come in? What's the average check? How much are they going to drink? How many tables can we turn? And what are all our costs? And is there going to be anything left at the end?
Yeah, no, 100%. David, you emphasized the importance of market research before even getting into opening a restaurant. And there's going to be nuances in different things in different market. What I've seen, David, in my experience in the industry and when attending restaurant shows and all that stuff, the most successful units, when they have multi-unit operators and they have it all over the US, it's actually not in the main cities. Because the big cities, again, rents are high, labor is high, like all of these things. Now, yes, Magic, Colorado, Denver, might have been a different, complicated, more complex for different reasons. But then there's many other cities where you'll be well-received, rents are cheap, you can find labor, and it's going to be your most profitable stores. I see that as happening with many operators. And we've opened restaurants in Miami ourselves, and it's a saturated, super complicated, super complex market. And I think the way to grow, and if you ask me to start again, I would go to those markets. I wouldn't open in a city like Miami and New York, even though it seems, yes, there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of people. It's so competitive and so hard.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And like I said, I think there are markets that 20 years you wouldn't even thought of going, where there's real talent, there's a real culture. And Charleston is a great restaurant town and a great town. And I've talked to some of the operators down there that are doing super well. I remember meeting John Lewis, who has Lewis Barbecue. So he was a partner in Franklin Barbecue in Austin, obviously very well known, came to Charleston for a barbecue event with Rodney Scott. And he scoped down and goes, you know what? I'm coming here. And he built this. It's like, he's got 500 seats north of downtown. The process of building didn't need a lot of permits. He could build what he wanted. And he's a maestro of brisket. He's really genius, and he's just crushing it. I agree. And I think it's New York. If I can make it there, I can make it anywhere. A lot of people are drawn to it appropriately. But if I was going to start a restaurant business, I probably would not start it in New York. I'd go somewhere where the cost structure, we have that balance of cost structure, good labor, and good demand.
For sure. So David, let's talk about funding, because I think that's something that many restaurateurs are interested in learning how to do it properly, right? Because you can get into deals that could be very bad. And at the end of the day, you have thin margins. So you have to consider where you're getting the funding from and how you're going to build that into your business model.
No, absolutely.
So what would you recommend, David, for I guess it depends on where you're at in your path. Any thoughts on that?
And again, it depends on the business that you're in, right? Fast casual versus fine dining. I talk to a lot of operators who are opening full service sit down restaurant. They got to raise $250,000 to $2 million. Depending on in Miami, it's going to be more. It depends on what it is. But for the first time restaurant, usually it's on the smaller side. And what I tell them is a couple things: is first restaurant, wherever you came from, like, you have a network, you have family, you have customers who love you and love your food. So it's going to be friends and family. And it's a hard thing to do, but You really got to work your network. You gotta get your story straight. You put together a deck and go out and start telling the story. But one of the things that I think has evolved that a lot of operators aren't aware of is that there are alternative funding sources that can help, for the most part, not replace the friends and family, but can supplement it so that you don't have to raise as much, and you don't have to raise as much equity. Some of it is in different forms. I try to help founders and operators understand what those sources are and what the implications are, and take advantage of them if you can. So as an example, there's a group called Inkin, which will fund restaurants, typically not first-time restaurants, but if you already have an existing restaurant and you're opening your second or your third or your fourth, they will basically purchase dining credits from you at a discount and resell them to their customers who go on their app and say, I'm going to buy $1,000 worth of credits. Where do I want to use it? And there's a spread in there that kind of makes it work for the restaurants, makes it work for Inkin. And again, they're not in every city, but clearly they're in New York. It can help you attract customers because people are going to go on their app and go, where do I want to go? This is a new place. Let me check it out. And it's not free, but it's not like a loan that you have regular recurring payments. You just have to be prepared to deliver a meal for money that you got paid 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. So I encourage founders to look at that as an option. There's another group based in New York, but they do work more broadly, called Phoenix, starting with an F, that provide loans for building out restaurants. And they get paid interest, but a fairly reasonable rate of interest, because they also take over the merchant card processing, which is another revenue source for that. And for the restaurateur, it's all the same, but they're really good, knowledgeable folks in the space. There's equipment financing. There's another sort of crowdfunding platform called New Market that does, food related companies. So they do CPG, they also do hospitality, but again, they're selling credits that'll be cashed in at some point in the future. So I think when you're in that position, the more you can reduce how much you need to go and beg friends and family for, the better. And so I try to educate folks about what those options are. And there's actually, I did a presentation a couple of years ago at the James Beard Foundation. They do a great program for women restaurant owners and bakery owners and chefs, a financial literacy program. And I did a presentation that they taped. So it's on YouTube, and walking through that whole process of raising capital, and called out a bunch of the alternative funding sources. But they're definitely out there. I think there's capital out there looking to invest in, I think on the fast casual side, if you can get to, call it 3 to 5 units, and you demonstrate 4-wall profitability and a unique product that people like, there are definitely investors. And again, everyone comes with their own requirements and terms. You have to decide, do I take in a partner who's going to have majority? It's not my baby anymore. But there are good investors that are adept at scaling those kinds of concepts from 3, 4, 5 to 20 or 30 or 50 or 100. TriSpan is a great one. The Kitchen Fund, run by a guy named Greg Golkin, is a great one. There are others out there. So there's definitely capital for that. And I think increasingly there's been a couple of new funds that have focused not on the fast casual brand that's going to go from 2 to 100, but for somebody who's built a multi-unit fine dining brand that maybe they'll get to 8 or 9 units, but it's not going to grow from that. It's not going to grow beyond the region, but it's a good, profitable business generating cash flow. How does that owner monetize at least some of what he's built? And there's been some new fund launches to try to target that. So there's definitely capital around looking for great restaurant concepts, depending on which part of the market you're in. And it's interesting because even some of the bigger groups that we all know, they still tend to raise money unit by unit, which is interesting. It's still very fragmented, but there's so many great new restaurant launches that I know in New York just in the last year. And so the money's out there. Most of those are raised friends and family. And for all the obvious reasons, people, particularly if there are customers, fans of the operators, they want to be part of it. And it may be a very expensive VIP table, but
for sure.
people definitely go for it.
David, you just mentioned something I think that it's crucial and so important. Of course, it depends again on the stage that you're at, but financial literacy, because as you well know, and you started in the restaurant industry, not knowing anything about finance. And what do you recommend? Any resources out there for restaurant owners? Is even if they're growing, they have maybe 2, 3, 4 units or whatever. I think that's still a crucial thing that many don't really know much about, and make very expensive mistakes like I did when I was starting out because we just don't know how to navigate. We're restaurant people, right? We're not finance people. So any suggestions on what people, entrepreneurs and restaurateurs can do for this? And let's start with this question. So you got another one after that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great one. And I think one of the things I try to do to help, operators is when they start the restaurant. So you need a lawyer to draw up your documents. You're going to operate as an LLC, wherever the case may be. And I've seen restaurants that I'm like, who did your work? And they're like, oh, this guy who's a friend of my father's cousin's brother. They don't know anything about hospitality. And who does your insurance, which is really important in the restaurant world. You have to know someone who really understands how it works for restaurants, for multi-unit operations and so forth. And a lot of times it's not the right fit. So building that team of folks that have very relevant domain expertise is really important. And that includes bookkeeping and accounting. There are some really good bookkeepers around. Tara Page is one that I know the folks there. Tara Berman runs that. She's great. And again, she can provide a very clear picture of the numbers and understand where you're at, whether you're making money, if you're not making money, where, what's out of line. And I think one of the challenges, particularly for folks opening their first or second, is their capital constraint. And obviously they're watching every penny. And they're like, if I can find someone to do it cheap, that'll be better. And I think there are places where you have to be willing not to spend inappropriate amounts of money, but hire a really good bookkeeper who's going to be able to watch your P&L and get you a P&L that you can look at. Also a good accounting firm that does a lot of work in the space. And there's some really good ones that have a real focus on it. And so I think making sure you get that team in place early on, there's lots of good technology that can help. There's Restaurant 365, which a lot of people know and love. There's some interesting, there's an early stage startup run by a great guy named Jordan Silverman called Starfish. And it's basically using AI to visualize the P&L. So that's having a bunch of spreadsheets. You actually can have visualizations and like 4 or 5 charts to tell you exactly what's going on. So again, if I'm a chef and I make beautiful food, what do I know about a P&L? But it's, to your point, it's really important to know that. And I'd say the other thing, and one of the reasons why we do these dinners is that operators should talk to their peers, both people that are at the same stage they are, but people that have gotten to the next level. And I find that folks in the industry are happy to share what they know and talk to each other. There's conferences and things like that, but those tend to be RFDC, which is a big restaurant conference, is thousands of people, and it's a lot of big brands and franchise companies and stuff like that. There's just not as many. There's not as many places you can just go and go, oh, hey, who do you use for this? And what apps do you use and things like that? What do you do for reservations and resident versus open, all that kind of stuff. And I think that really leaning into your network and tapping into the experience of folks that have gone on the path that you're on now before you. And as you said, you made a lot of mistakes. If you can tell someone who's going down that path, like, don't take the right fork, take the left fork. It's hugely valuable.
Yeah, no, 100%. And David, so once they get to a certain place with operators, now they got to start looking at different things. At what stage in their business development should they really start seeking financial advisory service like yours? And why is early planning so crucial?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think there's a single answer. I think it's not if someone's successful and they're making money, whether obviously in fine dining, there's not as much opportunity for an exit to sell the whole thing and get cashed out. There is in a tech business or in a CPG business. Fast casual, you do have those opportunities. The time to seek personal financial advice is not when you're about to close your deal. It's when, there's a lot of foundational pieces that you need to put in place to really create a successful family plan. And that involves estate planning, tax planning, insurance planning, and investment planning. And a lot of those, particularly the estate planning, the tax plan, that kind of structure can precede actually having the money. But obviously you don't want to take the time and spend the cost to do all that stuff if it's going to be 10 years down the road. People should have basic wills and trusts. I meet a lot of founders, they have young families. There's reasons to do that, and that can be done reasonably inexpensively. But it's with operators being as busy as they are, even though they could, in theory, get a lot of that work done fairly quickly, they don't have the time, they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the focus. And we really try to be their co-pilot in saying, here's the path, here's the things that need to get done. And by the way, if you haven't done step 3, we're gonna track that and go, hey, let's get this done and get on to the next stage. Just like you build a business plan, you got to build a plan for your personal wealth and think about all the things that, you want that are important to you in your life with family and kids and lifestyle and everything else. And it's not just getting the actual work done. It's also getting your head around, what does this mean for someone who's been cash poor? And all of a sudden when that changes, like, how does this affect my relationships, my friendships, how I spend my time, all those things. And it really takes time to build that narrative of what's my plan going to be. I think a lot of founders take it day to day and don't really have an opportunity to take a step back and say, where am I at? Where am I trying to get to? How am I going to get there?
No, that makes a ton of sense. And David, you mentioned having an exit strategy. And I think that's also very important, especially in this business, right? Because sometimes it's how long the restaurants last unless it's a fast casual thing you're currently running. But anyways, what should food entrepreneurs consider when planning an exit strategy? And how can they ensure that they're making financially sound decisions for their?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Again, I think it's somewhat dependent on what part of the business you're in. Again, if fast casual, I think has a clearer path to an exit, a monetization event. And I think again, talking to peers, getting connected with folks in the industry that do that kind of work is really helpful. Like you're not gonna have an exit with 5 units of a fast casual. It might be a nice business and that's fine, but you're not going to have an exit. I think again, in the fine dining space, there have been transactions there, but I think you have to be realistic about the opportunities to do that. I think it's just understanding what the opportunities are and building a plan, whether it's we have the capacity to have multiple brands, multiple units. If one starts to fade and isn't as popular, let's shut that down and open the next one. I think it's just being realistic about what the opportunities are, and rather than just going, hey, we're just coming in day to day, putting out the fires, right? One of the things I would say I found hugely valuable in my own business, and I encourage founders in any industry to do this, is to have an advisory board. We had the opportunity, we had some great folks that had been public company board members. One was it's still a client of mine, was a Harvard Business School professor and a consultant to Fortune 100 companies. He was amazing to have as a sounding board. And I think there's, again, because people are so busy, they tend not to do that. And they tend not to, even if they have advisory boards, they tend not to actually take the time to schedule a meeting. And I found personally with my own business that, you're so busy day to day and you think, in your head about where you're going, where you're trying to get to, but a lot of times it doesn't get out of your head out into the world. And sometimes you say those things out loud and somebody goes, that doesn't make any sense. Right. So you tell yourself the same story. And then when you actually share it with other people whose opinions you respect, you make it a different perspective. I always found the opportunity, we used to do it once a year, of just take 2 days, have your advisory board in, set an agenda, prepare materials, and really have an in-depth conversation about where we're at, where we're trying to get to, what the plan is. I found that hugely valuable. And I think people that are in the around founders, and particularly around restaurants, and people are passionate, enthusiastic about restaurants, having a couple people who you respect, who bring different perspectives, and to say, hey, listen, once a year or twice a year, we're going to have you in, we're going to go in the private dining room, we're going to have a great dinner, but we're going to spend some time and really dig into the numbers, where we're at, what the challenges are, where we get to. I think that can be hugely valuable to figuring out what your path is and what your ultimate goal is.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%, David. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with somebody else about this. And that's been the case for me as well, because especially as an entrepreneur, it's a lonely road. So you need to surround yourself with a lot of people that can help you see things differently. And I was actually mentioning to her that this is something cool you can do actually with AI. You can program your strategic advisors on AI with AI, basically. So choose whoever you want to be your strategic advisor. You feed it all this information about your business and everything.
Right.
And it takes that persona and it will spit out really great advice. Wow. Crazy. So I didn't believe it. I tried it. And then I saw what came out. I was like, holy crap, man, this is
That's right.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's never going to replace people. But what I'm saying, I mean, in that sense, I think. But anyways, just for anybody that might not have that they can just try that out. Last question, David. How do you define success for your clients and what steps do you take to help them achieve it?
I think success is being able to look, entrepreneurs work so incredibly hard. There's so many challenges you deal with failure and it takes so much to get there.
Yeah.
If you're fortunate enough to get to a point where you've created wealth, it sounds like the pot at the end of the rainbow. In a lot of ways it is, but it's also creates challenges. And so I think if clients have a clear path and clarity about what's really important to them in life, like when you have options, like when you don't have any money, you can only live in a certain place. You can only drive a certain car. You can only go on certain vacations. When you have, and again, there's different levels, but when you've created real wealth, all of a sudden you have those options. Those problems aren't problems anymore. And then it becomes your relationships, your kids. Kids are that one of the most difficult issues to, what do I do? Do I give my kids money? Like I didn't have any money. I want them to have initiative, but I also don't want them to have to live in a van down by the river. It's very complicated. So I think success is getting clarity about what's really important to you in life. It's not just, I want this kind of house. I want this kind of car. What really matters to you? What are you passionate about? What makes you happy? What brings you joy? And figuring out a financial plan to help you get there. And people are living their best lives. That's success.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. That was great. And I think that's a beautiful way of putting it because you got to frame it like what's important to you. It's different for everybody.
Exactly. It's not what the next guy, it's really very personal. And a lot of times entrepreneurs, they never really get to think about that because they're just trying to get there. They're just trying to keep from falling off they're riding that wave and they're trying not to fall off. And when they actually get an opportunity to take a step back, it's a little bit of a learning experience for them to actually think that way and slow down and think, what's the rest of my life look like? And what's going to make me feel like I lived my life to its fullest when I get there.
Yep. That's great stuff, David. And I think for me, it's about contribution, but that'll be a different conversation. But so David, if people want to get in touch with you, how could they?
Great. So I'm a partner and a wealth advisor at Corian, which is a national partnership that's brought together about 40 firms around the country as partners to provide services focused solely on high net worth clients. And so we've got offices all over the country. I'm based in New York. My email address is david.spungen, Spungen at Corian.com. And just hit me up there and happy to help however I can.
Fantastic, David. So we're going to include all the links and everything, of course, at the end of the show. And is there any other way that I or we as a company can help you, David, and support you with what you're doing as well?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I appreciate that. Always looking for introductions to great founders and entrepreneurs. They don't necessarily have to be on the precipice, but obviously someone that's on a path where they're going to need our help at some point. And always happy to help even folks that maybe they're not going to get there, but because of the network that I've built, I can usually find a way to help someone, whether it's their first restaurant or their 50th restaurant. Always like to meet great people, and New York City is a tough place to get reservations. So it's great to know people when they get that restaurant open, all of a sudden you can't get in.
Yeah, I do have a couple of people in mind, so I'll definitely make sure to make an intro there.
No, wonderful. I love entrepreneurs. And I love food people. And so just really, I get a lot of satisfaction out of spending a lot of my time with those folks. So I want them all to be successful and all make it to where they can be clients.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you so much again, David, for joining us. And it's been really a pleasure and enjoy to talk to you. So anyways, and I hope to see you in New York soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sebastian. Appreciate you having me on. And anytime you want me back, let me know.
Thank you.
All right.